Hey guys, welcome back to the MSR Workshop. So in my series of videos that I'm doing on the Monport Laser that I am being sponsored to do, we are going to finish up the videos of the upgrades today. So we're going to get our water assist hooked up. We are going to get our heater installed in our bucket because right now it's cold. We don't want to crack our laser tube. And we are going to get our inline flow meter installed as well as an inline temperature gauge. So stick around. So kicking this video off on the Monport K40 laser upgrades meant taking a trip to the hardware store. And we are going to pick out a bucket for our water chiller. Now, the bucket that I decided to pick out was a 2-gallon bucket. Now you can get a 5-gallon. And if you're going to be running this exclusively on just the aquarium pump that comes with it, especially in hotter months, I recommend getting the bigger bucket. Now, because I'm not going to be running this exclusively on a bucket, I opted for a smaller bucket, especially since I'm going to be running an aquarium heater in here. The larger volume of water is just going to make it harder to heat up. So the smaller bucket worked better for me at this instance. So we're going to have to make a modification to the bucket, and we're going to need to drill a couple little holes in the top, and those are going to be for our water inlet and outlet tubes, as well as to run the power cords out, and also somewhere to run the power cord out for our little tank heater. So here I'm installing 2 small holes, and they're going to be the same size as the grommets that I'm using, and I'll throw a link up where you can get these grommets on Amazon. And then a larger hole, this is going to be where we're going to run our power cords out. And I just measured the width of the power cord and picked the largest Forstner bit I could use without going too large so I could still fit the power cord heads out. Now I'm just getting this moved over to a little bit better workstation instead of on my table saw, because having this on my table saw means I can't use my table saw. Now here I'm just installing the little rubber suction cup feed on the bottom of this pump. And it's not a very big pump, but you don't really need a very big pump because you don't have a huge tube that you're putting a lot of water through. Now if you were to have a higher powered laser, they really do recommend actually getting a chiller unit for it, but these little pumps do work well, especially since I'm just using a 2-gallon bucket. Now I got the bright idea to use one of these grommets. I ended up taking it off, and you'll see why here in just a second. So I'm just going to go ahead and drop that down in the bucket, and the suction cups stick nicely to the bottom, and that'll just keep it from floating. I doubt it would float anyways, just because it's got a little bit of weight to it. But yeah. So here is my little glass aquarium heater, and it's not a very expensive one. And I'm setting the temperature all the way at its lowest setting, which should be the recommended operating temperature for running your laser at. And actually it was kind of coincidental that the length of the aquarium heater was the exact same height as my bucket. So it made it nice because then I could stick the temperature gauge right out the top, and then if I need to adjust it at all, the adjustment is sticking out the top. So let's open up our little flow gauge. And this is meant for a computer. So you're going to actually remove part of it. But this little bag here is all of our fittings. Now they're metal fittings, and each one of the fittings has a little rubber gasket on it. Now I went one step ahead and put some Teflon tape on the threads just to make sure that I didn't have any leaks. Don't necessarily recommend doing that, and I may end up removing it later if I have any problems with it. But the problem you run into is if you get any Teflon tape that didn't lay down flat in between your gasket, you may have a place where it could cause a leak instead of prevent leaks. So you may just end up using the gasket that comes with it and nothing else, and it should be fine. You're not putting a lot of pressure through it with this little aquarium pump, so it shouldn't be a problem. So it comes with a lot of extra cords which you're not going to use. That black and the red cord is your power cord, and you can just cut it off as close as you want to that white computer clip because you're not going to use those. Now the first step in getting this installed is actually removing the old temperature sensor, and it is just taped to the outside of one of the tubes for your laser tube. And very carefully, I'm using a razor blade just to remove all the tape because they put a whole bunch of tape around this thing. And now we get the fun part of removing the hot glue that is holding that temperature probe on. And it was a little bit of a pain to get off. So prying and prodding and digging and hitting it with a screwdriver, and it finally came out here. So threading the other one through, plus the red and black cord, which is our power cord, and we're going to be go ahead and wiring this into the lighting system of the laser. Now where we're going to be wiring it is the lights. So the lights run, I know, on a very low voltage because they're LEDs, and according to the instructions on this, you can run it from anywhere between 5 volts to 24 volts. So I know my wiring on my lights is going to be perfect for this. So I just find the little white wire that goes over to the lights, and it's just really close, and then I just snip it at a length that I think I have enough wire left to wire both ends. And then I just start stripping my wires down. And the nice thing about these light wires is they're marked positive and negative, so you know which ends to hook up. If you look close on them, they have a bunch of plus marks on one of the wires. So I'm just twisting all the wires together. Now one thing I did off camera is I heated up a little bitty pot of solder and just dipped all the ends in solder. But I'm using these Wago quick connectors, and they made wiring them fantastic, especially because you're using really small gauge wire. Using a wire nut on these don't work very well, and they don't tend to hold super good. So these little Wago connectors were fantastic for this. And then I was able to test to make sure it worked, and so here we are, and of course I ended up installing it upside down, so I just had to pop it back out and flip it around, but that was pretty easy to do. And then I did actually put a little hot glue because it wasn't a really tight fit, it was movable. So I put a little hot glue on it. And my lights do come on inside, so I know I did it right. Now, one thing I'm doing here is I am installing a mount for the flow indicator. Now, you don't have to do this, you can just have it hang off the back. I wanted to have it mounted on top, and I chose to have it mounted to the far left because that's where the least amount of electronics are in case anything sprung a leak or broke. It's not over any electrical cables or cords, so if it were to drip down, you don't have your high voltage laser tube electrics right there. And these are one of these just little metal stepped drill bits that work really good for drilling through soft aluminum or metal. And I'm going to be installing a little tray that it fits in that I 3D printed, and I'll throw up a link where I got that. Now off camera, I went ahead and drilled 2 more holes. This is going to be my outfeed for my water, and installed grommets on these, and that's to protect it from any little sharp edges for the aluminum that I drilled in. As you can see, I like these little rubber grommets. I used them a lot. There was a lot of little holes all over this laser. A couple that I put in, but most of them were there already, and then I was able to plug a lot of these. Made it a little bit more airtight, just to kind of prevent any smoke leaks, and I'm assuming with make it so my suction works a little bit better. So here I'm going to go ahead and cut my tubing. And this is on the outflow of the laser. I don't think it matters too much if it's on the inflow or the outflow. The outflow is the far side. If you did want it on the inflow, you'd have to put it closer to your electronics. But your inflow temperature and your outflow temperature should be almost virtually the same. So I couldn't possibly see a reason to need to put it on the other side. And I'm just feeding the other one up to the other side, and just make sure when you cut this you have enough room on your or slack on your tubing. When you open your door, you can open the door and it doesn't kink or break anything. Now, one thing I did before I finished securing this down really well is just to do a leak check. And now it's time to fill up my bucket with distilled water, and I used about 1 and maybe 3/4 gallon, and then I came back after sucked it up through the tube and added a little bit more just to make sure that my heater is all the way submerged. And now it's time to get out all the air bubbles. So I went in and switched this on, and it took a little bit for all the air bubbles to get out, and I turned it on and turned it off, kind of tipped the machine a little bit just to work some of the air bubbles out. Hey guys, so let's do a real quick recap of what we've done so far before we fire this up and test it for the first time. So we have installed our flow control indicator, as well as drilled the holes and got this mounted. We printed this little bracket, and I'd like to point out that anything that I use, I will try and leave them in the description below. So if you're like, hey, where do I get that part? Just look in the description below and it'll tell you exactly where to go to either buy it, or in this case, this would be to make one yourself. Then we installed the little digital readout that's going to tell us our inline temperature, because this has an inline temperature sensor on it. We went ahead and filled our bucket up, turned our pump on, stuck it in the bucket, added our heater, and it's a good thing we did add our heater because it's about 21 degrees outside. It is still quite cold in my shop. I've been running my heater for a couple hours today, so it is warm enough for me to be out here, but it's still not super warm. And of course, tonight the temperatures are going to drop back down. And we've got all that turned on. We've got our air assist plugged in, made sure that's working. So I think we're ready to go ahead and plug it into our computer for the first time and see how it works. So first thing we're going to do is I have got a really long USB-C cable. And one thing to note, you cannot use a regular USB cable and use an adapter to convert it to a USB-C. I tried it, it doesn't work. So just buy yourself a really long USB-C cable, or if you're in case, you're gonna just plug it into a laptop next to it, buy a dedicated cable. In my case, my computer is across the room, so I had to buy about a 25-foot one, and it'll work just fine. So we'll go ahead and open this up, and yes, I have not taken this off. I'm sorry, I forgot to take that off, but we'll have to unbolt that and get it figured out later. So, got this plugged in, and one thing I want to note here is this little knob right here. Just go ahead and turn that all the way up. Now, the only time you would want to turn this back down is if you were doing a lens alignment, you were wanting to just check where your pointer is, where you've got this little yellow fire button here. Because if you have all this way up and you go to test fire it on, say, a piece of tape, it's going to catch your piece of tape on fire because it's way too powerful. So then in this case, you would just turn this almost all the way down just so you can get that little bitty dot to check your placement. So yes, turn this all the way up, and we're working. Kicks my fan on in the back, kicks my air assist on over there. my temperature readout, the light comes on. Now one thing that's interesting is a USB-C does backfeed power just a little bit because you can use USB-C to charge. And so this does get a little bit of light to it. So let's jump over to the computer and we'll get this turned on. Okay, so right here, this is our LightBurn screen, and we've got to go down here and select our Gerbil. And I don't know if you can hear it, but it is homing my laser right now, so I know it's connected. And I went ahead on Etsy, and I'll leave a link for this too, and you have a power settings library that you can download from Etsy for a 40-watt laser. So this is a huge help. So let's go ahead and type something here. So we're going to do test. And we're going to go ahead and do that. Let's do some lowercase letters. And let's move that around. Okay. And we're going to go over to our cuts and layers, and we're going to set this to fill. Double click on that, and we're going to change our fill speed. So I'm going to go at 100 millimeters a second, and I'm going to go 10% power. I don't need it very dark. We're going to go bidirectional fill, so we'll go both directions. 500 lines per inch. We don't need to do it that much. We're going to go to 150 lines per inch. And lines per inch is how close together these lines are. So the more, you're going to get a better looking engraving. And we're going to home this thing. So if I click here, our laser should go right there, and then we'll hit start. All right, now let's take that same thing and go ahead and cut it out and start. So taking a look at the letters here, I actually was cutting out 1/8 inch plywood instead of 3 mil, and I had 3 mil settings, so my letters could be improved even on this. But there's not that much charring on the edges. They're a little bit dark, but they're not just plain old charred. The backside maybe a little bit, and hopefully that'll improve when maybe in the future I'll add a honeycomb bed, but they do look pretty darn good. All right, guys, well, I hope you liked that video. This was a great first start. Had a few little hiccups. Had to adjust the power just a little bit, but overall I think that turned out pretty good. Now I know there's a bunch more settings that you can adjust in LightBurn to make this even better. Now one thing I want to point out though is that because we added a new air assist head and a new lens, our focal distance has changed. It means that our bed is actually a little bit farther away from our lens, and what happens is as the farther the beam gets away from your workpiece, the more it flares out and you have a wider line. So what I did here is I put a little piece of wood underneath it and raised it back up. So I think I've got it adjusted correctly for the height. Now the nice thing about that is if you do put an auxiliary bed in here and maybe one of those little scissor jacks that you raise your bed up, you do have a little bit more wiggle room because your lens now is farther away, so you have a little bit more room to raise it up or lower it. But next videos, we're going to be actually starting to make some projects, and we're not going to be doing upgrades anymore. Now, I have not hooked up the exhaust vacuum yet. That's something that I'm just going to do off camera. And I went ahead and bought one of these little dryer vents that I'm going to just attach on this side door here of my house, drill a little hole, and then just attach the tubing to that. I will leave a link in this below, but I'm not going to go ahead and film it because I have to cut a hole in my door. It's really, really cold now, and I wanted to get this video out for you guys. But so far, the heater seems to be working great. It seems to be operating at the perfect temperature. The power supply temperature is reading 15.9 Celsius, and that's after running it for a few seconds, leaving it on, so you know it's cold in the room. If I left anything out, be sure and leave them in the comments below, but stay tuned for my next video. I release a video every 2 weeks, and we're going to be going ahead and building some stuff on this now. So now that we've got it up and running, and I want to make it as clean a build and easy as a build for most people, and to make it look like it came from the factory. Hope you guys enjoyed this, and see you in the next one.